Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. Joining me now to talk about upcoming voting here in Connecticut, Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. Stephanie, thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you for having me as always.
So it's always really busy in your office, and
Yes.
it's stayed really busy even since our last elections in
Yes.
November. But in just a few days, we're going to see a primary redo in Bridgeport.
Yes.
So after watching surveillance video of alleged ballot fraud, the judge ruled to throw out the results of September's primary. This has all been pretty unprecedented to deal with, right?
For me, certainly, since this is my first year in the role. But there have been court orders in the past, but not in this specific type of situation. So, but what I've said to everyone, I'm so glad there was that footage so the judge could make a very firm ruling versus it just languishing for years.
And on that note, you know, we've spoken at length about this before. Your administration all along has said that election security is, of course, so important, but you've been pretty adamant that election fraud and mistakes do happen, but it's more important to see how you react and what happens afterward if it's caught, like with that surveillance footage. So why has that been your focus, more on the response?
Well, there always is a small amount of fraud, right? And I think what people forget, and they point to all these cases, it's like, yes, it was caught. So, you know, if you look at any study over any period of time, it's like 0.0000001% of cases. So what I like to do, instead of focusing on these big headlines, is look at what type of incident occurred and try to close gaps in the system. So, you know, I try to work the problem, and that's what we're trying to do in Bridgeport right now.
And let's get into some of the basics of what's happening. So specifically, what will be happening next week with the primary redo and then beyond that?
So, as you know, the court case centered around the absentee ballot footage, but the new primary, of course, will involve absentee ballots, but also regular election day voting, so people can go to their polling place from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So we've had 2 election monitors in the town clerk's office every single day, and they've been doing many different things to like eat away at different aspects of the problems that come to their attention.
Gotcha. And what role do these election monitors and the registrars play in this process?
So town clerks handle absentee ballots, registrars handle election day voting. So the election monitors are in the town clerk's office, and they play a lot of different roles. They make sure the local staff are following procedures to the letter of the law. If they see places where procedure can be improved, they instruct them and give them best practice training. There's a new town clerk in Bridgeport. A lot of people don't realize that was just elected in November, so they've been training him as well.
Right.
And then when people come in and ask questions, they're there as a voice for community members to give them answers, make sure people picking up absentee ballots understand the law, and on and on and on.
And if someone is concerned or feel like they see something that maybe shouldn't be going on, what should they know? Who should they talk to? Is it those election monitors?
Sure. If they just have a question like, is this okay? Is that okay? They can certainly call the town clerk's office and ask for one of the election monitors. They could also call the Secretary of the State's office or check our website. If they know something was done illegal, that should go to the State Elections Enforcement Commission, SEEK. And you know, you can Google that. There's a hotline number, etc. So if you know something is illegal, you have to report that. Our office has no investigatory powers.
Right. I know that was kind of a whole debate, especially when this first started. And as we've both said, this started because of those absentee ballots. But with a special election, we know it's a lot more common for people to vote that way, to apply for absentee ballots. And Bridgeport has had a record number of applications for absentees this time around. how does Connecticut keep absentee ballots and absentee voting secure?
You know, we have really strict laws, and that's why I always say we need the public's help, because we can't investigate something unless it's reported. If it's reported, it goes to the investigation process that SEEK handles, then we have an opportunity to adjudicate these specific instances. You know, I keep talking about over the years, some of the same people have been named in some of these cases. So I feel like something has to happen there. Otherwise, the process is very tight, and our monitors are there, again, to make sure the law is being followed. So we are doing everything we can. Anytime something comes to our attention, we try to address it in real time. Like a form came up and we realized people might not understand what they're signing. It's a special form if you need a duplicate ballot because you like spilled coffee on yours or something.
Gotcha.
But it was like a 10-point font. I couldn't even read it. So like within a couple of hours, we recreated the form, much larger font with a big label on it saying, if you sign this, it means X. Just little things can help tweak the process.
Right, absolutely. And when it comes to absentee ballots, this year, all Connecticut voters will be filling out a ballot question about whether or not they want no excuse absentee ballot voting in elections. This is something you've supported before. Do you still think that this is a good move and right for Connecticut?
I think it is. What I try to remind people, you know, we think in these big terms, so no excuse absentee ballots. I think that 33, 35 other states already have this, have had it. But there's probably 12, 15, 20 different ways to do it. So people tend to speak like it's a monolith, but we can create a program that makes sense for us here. In some states, for example, their program, they created it so that the state would send out absentee ballot applications, so political parties and candidates cannot. And that's how they thought it was better to make it more secure. Other states handle it in different ways. So I think people should just think about if it's a good idea for the constitutional amendment that'll be on the ballot in November, and then work with their legislative delegation to figure out what system works best for Connecticut.
Sort of similar to what we saw with early voting last year.
Correct.
The constitutional amendment, the ballot question passed, but then the legislative session was determining how to actually implement it. Because as people were saying, so many states have a different number of days in deciding what's best for
I've been doing a lot of research already. I started late last year, just so if it does pass, we're not starting late. And I came across data, like there's one state that accepts it by fax. And I just thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't think we would do that, but you know, for states where geography is an issue and people can't easily get from place to place. So I thought that was interesting, but it just tells you it's a good example of how many different ways there are to do these things.
Right, and before we move on from Bridgeport, is there anything else you feel you or your office have learned from this whole situation? Any conversations or changes you would like to see happen going forward?
Sure. I mean, we'll definitely be putting forth a legislative package centered around tweaks that could make the absentee ballot current process we have more secure, like closing the window for applications. Like right now, I could request an application for an election in November. I don't think that makes sense because who knows if they can vote by absentee ballot yet in November. So little things like that we'll definitely propose. And what I have learned is what I learned ever since I took this job. Most people started voting at a young age. They don't realize laws change over time, and no one studies this. So people are legitimately confused about what is and isn't allowed, voters I'm talking about. So the more we can do to educate the public about election procedures, I think the better off we all will be.
And with voters, we did see low turnout back in November as all of this was shaking out in Connecticut's biggest city. Voters told us they felt confused and cheated and maybe concerned their vote didn't even count. What do you say to those voters, especially ahead of next week, just a few days away from this primary redo?
I mean, based on the footage, right, they have a right to be angry and bitter, right? I would be like, what? But your vote always counts. It's even if you don't vote, that counts. You know, they said at the time when the case first broke that if more people had voted in person, it wouldn't have mattered that we don't know how many envelopes were illegally deposited in the drop box. But if that number was 50 or 100, whatever it was, if 100 more people had voted in person, it would not have been, we would have still had to adjudicate that situation, but it wouldn't have mattered with the results. So I just remind people, your vote always counts, even if you're not casting it.
So now let's talk about all of us heading back to the polls for the next primary, the presidential primary, you know, along with many other races. But has your office already started preparing for that?
Yes, tomorrow we have to announce who is going to be on the ballot, so that is certainly in process. And we also have been trying to remind voters that this is a party-specific primary, so check your voter registration. Some people, because they always vote Democrat or Republican, they think they're registered that way, but they're not. They're registered as unaffiliated. So then they won't be able to vote in that April election. So we've been reminding people, check your party status by going to myvote.ct.gov. But then also making sure you know that this election is coming up.
Because Connecticut doesn't have open primaries, right?
Correct,
You have to be registered with a specific party.
Exactly.
Because I know that's something in the past we've heard from voters, if they're unaffiliated or not registered, they show up to try and vote and are told you can't. So definitely important to make sure you can go vote.
Even if you're 99% sure you're registered to the right party, go back and check.
And with this primary, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit earlier.
Yes.
So, you know, that was something that was really supported by both state parties last legislative session. How much earlier is this April presidential primary?
Yeah, so it moved from the last Tuesday of April to the first Tuesday in April. So it will be April 2nd. And it will be the first election in Connecticut with early voting. So March,
double early.
Yeah, exactly. So March 26th will be the first day of voting.
Yep. And told me how early it is. We talked about that was passed during the last legislative session, determined how early it would be. Are there any extra security measures around that? You know, I know you've talked about needing extra poll workers and extra training. What's sort of going into making sure early voting gets off without a hitch?
I mean, the beauty of early voting is it's early in-person voting. So you're not losing your ballot, right? You see it, you fill it out, you put it in the receptacle. The training is so that when someone votes early, the voter registration system can be updated so that they then can vote absentee or come back on election day and vote. So the registrars are working so hard trying to make sure every town can implement this without a hitch. It's never been done here before. We don't know how many people will show up. So registrars are trying to hedge their bets and not overstaff and not understaff. So please, I ask the people of Connecticut, show them some mercy if you show up and there's a line.
And about that timing, people are getting a few days early, as you said, March 26th, because this is a presidential primary, but they're going to get a couple more days for the local elections, right?
Yeah, so for regular primaries like we have in August or September, that'll be a 7-day period. And for a general election in November, it's a 14-day period.
Yeah, and we usually see much larger turnout for these presidential primaries than Unfortunately, we do for local elections, but we're also seeing record dissatisfaction with government and candidates now in 2024. Have you seen this affecting the election here in Connecticut when you're out talking with voters?
Not so much.
Okay.
I mean, I think people in general, a lot of them don't, or what I've heard is more that people don't realize what's on the ballot for which election. They know the big positions, president, they know governor, but when I start talking about local positions, they don't really know who's on the ballot for what election. They sometimes don't know what each position does, but more importantly, sometimes they don't even know the election is happening. And that's why I loop back to the more public outreach being done by our office makes more sense to me than political parties and candidates.
Sure.
Because if you're an unaffiliated voter in some towns, no one may ever reach out to you to tell you the election's coming because they don't need your vote to win. And I think that's a problem for our democracy.
Yeah, and this was something you mentioned during your campaign.
Yeah.
Was you wanted to make the Secretary of the State's office the go-to
Yes.
place for election
Yes.
information.
Yes.
You've mentioned the importance of education and how you're
Yes.
hearing from voters about
Yes.
that confusion. Tell me a little bit with our last few minutes here how your office is trying to do that outreach and that education for people.
Sure. We definitely will be lobbying the legislature for that funding, but in lieu of that, we've had to get creative. So we started our civically engaged organization program. Towns have signed up, nonprofits and business owners to help us spread the word, and media companies to help us spread the word to their clients, customers, constituents. So we are just trying to do everything we can to get information into the hands of voters to help them demystify this whole process.
And is there anything you want people to know about where they should go or, look up or call if they want more information?
Sure, you can always go to myvote.ct.gov and look for our civic engagement tab. We also have a Civics 101 site.
Yeah, and I know your office has had a big social media presence,
Yes.
one of the best, in my opinion,
Thank you.
of all the agencies and
My
offices.
team thanks you.
Wonderful. But I mean, a lot going on for your office and for the state when it comes
Yeah.
to elections this year. So thank you as always for
Thank
coming
you.
on and chatting about it.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure we'll be talking again soon, but for now, that does it for us here on The Real Story. If you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 app, and you can watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61 and streaming on Fox 61 Plus. Have a great morning.